The cameras had not yet rolled, but the atmosphere inside the soundstage was already electric. The Kelly Clarkson show had a reputation for warmth, light-hearted banter, and a carefully choreographed charm that lulled viewers into believing every guest arrived smiling. But that morning, under the arched rigging of studio lights, there was a different energy, something taut, metallic, and almost dangerous. Outside, the barricades strained against the weight of paparazzi. They called his name in rapid bursts, shutters popping like firecrackers. Jason Momoa didn't smile. The Hawaiian sun god charisma that normally flowed so effortlessly from him was nowhere to be found. Instead, he moved with the deliberate weight of someone walking into a trial. Each flashbulb painted his cheekbones in quicksilver light, then left him in shadow again. Rumors had been swirling for weeks, cryptic posts about exhaustion, whispers from crew members about clashes behind closed doors. Inside, Kelly Clarkson waited at her desk, index cards neatly stacked, her signature grin in place. She'd been briefed. Producers had warned her Momoa might be a little intense today. She thought she could handle it. The floor manager counted down from 5. Theme music swelled, applause erupted, and Kelly launched into her opener with practiced ease, weaving in a quick anecdote about Momoa's love of rock climbing. She looked up, expecting his familiar laugh. Instead, his jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, and when he spoke, the air seemed to shift. "You say you understand creativity," he said, his voice low, deliberate, every syllable anchored. "Then why do you trivialize my process?" It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The quiet was volcanic, each word molten beneath a controlled surface. Kelly's smile faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed her eyes, and she instinctively glanced toward the producer's booth. The audience, mid-clap, froze. Someone coughed. The cameras stayed locked on the two of them. The space between host and guest suddenly charged like a live wire. Kelly tried to recover. I didn't mean to." But before she could finish, Momoa continued. "Every time I sit in one of these chairs, someone wants a soundbite, a meme, a quick laugh for the crowd. But art isn't a punchline." The words hung there heavy. Even the camera operators seemed reluctant to breathe too loudly. Somewhere in the control room, a producer mouthed, "What is happening?" Already, in the outside world, the first tremors of this moment were being felt. A crew assistant backstage had pulled out their phone, quietly streaming the show's feed. A screen recording found its way to Twitter before the first commercial break. Within minutes, hashtags began to flicker to life. Momo meltdown, Clarkson clash. Truth or tantrum. Kelly straightened in her seat. "Jason," she said gently, "I think people admire your work. I know I do." His eyes softened just a fraction, but his voice stayed edged. "Then don't reduce it to a promo reel. Don't. Take the fire out of it so it can fit into a box." The audience wasn't sure whether to applaud, gasp, or stay silent. In that suspended space, the glossy veneer of daytime television had cracked, and the raw, unedited truth had begun to seep through. The applause that followed Jason's remark was hesitant, polite, obligatory, the kind that comes when an audience isn't sure whether they've witnessed a moment of brilliance or the start of a disaster. Kelly, always the consummate professional, leaned forward slightly in her chair, her hands folded loosely in front of her. The smile she wore was still there, but it had shifted, no longer automatic, now edged with calculation. She decided to press on, as if the air hadn't thickened to the consistency of wet clay. "Your new project," she began, carefully enunciating each word, "has been getting a lot of buzz. Can you tell us what drew you to it?" Jason's gaze drifted past her to the bright studio lights. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make the room uneasy. "I'll tell you what didn't draw me to it," he finally said, his voice calm but unyielding. "It wasn't the red carpets. It wasn't the late-night talk circuits. And it definitely wasn't the shallow headlines that boil down years of work into a 10-second clip. A few audience members shifted in their seats. Kelly tried to chuckle, the sound brittle. Well, we all know there's more to it than that. But, you know, people are curious. They love hearing behind-the-scenes stories. Jason's eyes snapped. Back to hers. Curious, he repeated, almost tasting the word. Curiosity's good. But what passes for curiosity these days is nothing more than consumption. People want the glossy bits, not the grit. They want the myth, not the making. Kelly blinked as if trying to keep pace with where he was steering this. Are you saying, she asked slowly, that shows like mine don't respect the craft? Jason leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose like a man deciding how much truth to risk in a room full of cameras. I'm saying the craft isn't built for your format, and yet you insist on slicing it up to fit. Respect would mean letting it breathe, even if it means losing the punchline. For a moment, the tension hummed audibly. Kelly's hands tightened on the cue cards in her lap. The audience, accustomed to easy laughs and smooth segues, sat on the edge of their seats, sensing that the conversation had slipped out of the usual guardrails. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged quick glances. One scribbled a note on a clipboard, steer back to safe ground. But Kelly hesitated. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was pride, but something in her wasn't ready to retreat. So what would respecting the craft look like to you? She asked, her tone softer now, inviting. Jason's answer was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. It would mean asking better questions. Questions that don't treat art like an accessory. The words landed with weight. A few in the audience murmured, unsure whether they were watching an interview or an interrogation. Kelly shifted in her seat, the cards in her lap now more shield than prop. She could feel the current pulling this conversation into deeper waters, away from the glittering shallows where most daytime television lives. She inhaled, steadied her tone, and decided to pivot. I know you've been vocal about things that matter to you outside of acting, she began. Your work with ocean conservation, your support for indigenous rights. How do you balance those passions with everything else? Jason's face softened for a fraction of a second, just enough for the cameras to catch it before the storm returned. I don't balance them, he said bluntly. I live them. My kids don't need another staged headline about Dad saving the planet. They need me, present, not performing. The studio went still. Kelly gave a small, sympathetic nod. I think a lot of us get that, being pulled in a million directions. Jason's eyes didn't waver. Then you know how exhausting it is when every cause, every belief, every ounce of sincerity gets turned into a clip for likes and shares. I come on shows like this, thinking maybe I can speak about what matters. And then someone slaps a catchy caption on it, strips it of its meaning, and feeds it to the algorithm. There was no malice in his voice, only the hard truth of someone who'd seen it happen too many times. The audience, sensing the shift from irritation to principle, leaned in. Kelly hesitated. Her instinct was to defend the format, to insist that they were doing their part to amplify important messages. But looking at him now, broad shoulders tense, voice low but steady, she realized this wasn't about her. It was about the machinery of the entire industry. She tried anyway. We're trying to meet people where they are, to make things approachable. Jason shook his head slowly. Approachable is fine. But when you commodify compassion, you strip it of its power. You turn human struggle into background music. Somewhere, in the front row, a woman murmured, "Wow," under her breath. The rest of the audience stayed quiet, as if afraid to break the spell. Kelly exhaled through her nose, her hands now resting on her knees instead of the cards. That's a hard thing to hear. but maybe a necessary one. Jason didn't reply. Right away, he let the silence do the work. It was the kind of silence that didn't just fill the air. It demanded the room reckon with it. Jason's gaze sharpened, a flicker of something resolute igniting behind his eyes. The tension in the studio had thickened to a palpable weight, and now his voice carried the cadence of someone laying down an indictment. You know how a judge weighs fairness in a courtroom? He began, each word deliberate, measured. They listen to evidence, consider the narrative, then decide what is truth, what deserves justice. He paused, scanning the audience as if addressing a jury. That's how we creators judge our work. Every frame, every word, every gesture is testimony. But sometimes it feels like the court is stacked against us. His tone darkened, a hint of frustration threading through the solemnity. Judges looking the other way. Shows that don't want the truth because it's messy, complicated, uncomfortable. Kelly leaned in, her expression folding into concern. Are you saying your art is on trial? Exactly, Jason said, voice tightening. And not just art, it's authenticity. When the system wants sound bites, it convicts nuance. When? Ratings trump reason. Truth is the defendant, and spectacle the prosecutor. His hand clenched briefly on the armrest. The audience was silent, caught in the gravity of his metaphor. The glossy surface of daytime television had cracked completely, revealing raw, thorny questions beneath. Kelly's voice softened. So, how do you fight back? How do you make your case when the courtroom's stacked against you? Jason exhaled slowly, the weight of his struggle evident in the slow rise and fall of his chest. You speak louder. You bear witness. You refuse to be silenced. Because if the artist doesn't defend the truth, who will? A murmur rippled through the audience, a blend of admiration and unease in that charged moment. The show had morphed from entertainment to testimony, a legal drama played out not in courtrooms, but in living rooms, streaming devices, and social feeds worldwide. Jason's posture shifted, the hardness in his eyes melting into something rawer, more vulnerable. The courtroom metaphor had set the stage, but now the witness was ready to speak from the heart. I've sat through interviews where I barely remember the questions, he confessed, voice low, tinged with exhaustion. I've praised songs, scripts, causes I hadn't thought about in weeks, just to keep the machine running. He shook his head slowly, frustration simmering beneath the surface. It felt like perjury, lying to the world about who I really am. The audience was silent, the weight of his confession settling like a hush in the room. Kelly's brow furrowed, her usual bright demeanor replaced with a look of solemn respect. You're saying you weren't being truthful? She asked carefully. Jason gave a bitter laugh, a sound that was more a release than humor. No, not intentionally. But when you're forced to repeat lines, to play a part even off camera, the truth gets buried under layers of obligation. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture raw and human. It's exhausting. It's isolating. It's like testifying. Under oath, but having your words edited to fit someone else's story. Kelly's voice softened. Is there a way to reclaim that truth? Jason paused, eyes flickering with a fragile hope. Only if we stop performing our pain. If we stop packaging our struggles as products for consumption. His gaze met hers, steady and sincere. If we dare to be messy, imperfect, and real. A ripple of applause broke through the silence, tentative but growing. The tension shifted. This was no longer just a clash of egos, but a plea for authenticity in a world that demanded performance. The camera caught Kelly's face moved, thoughtful, and changed by the moment. Jason leaned back, the fire still burning in his eyes, but tempered now by a glimmer of peace. Jason's eyes narrowed slightly, the fire in his voice intensifying as the conversation took on a sharper edge. Kelly tried to maintain her calm, but it was clear the balance was tipping. So, how do you balance being a celebrity with the responsibility that comes with it? Kelly asked, voice steady but curious. Jason leaned forward, his tone resolute. Platforms care about likes, not lessons. They want spectacle, not sincerity. Kelly nodded slowly, trying to find common ground. But don't you think media can help spread important messages? He shook his head, frustration flickering across his face. They package me into sound bites and wonder why I don't fit their mold anymore. The ideological clash between commodified empathy and radical honesty hung heavy in the air. Kelly represented the mainstream format, polished and practiced, while Jason embodied the raw, unfiltered truth. You're saying the system forces you into a box, Kelly said softly. Exactly, Jason replied. And when you're forced to perform pain, it loses its meaning. The audience sat silent, absorbing the tension, the battle lines drawn clearly between spectacle and sincerity. Behind the scenes, producers watched anxiously, aware that this conversation was spiraling into uncomfortable territory. Jason's voice dropped, almost a whisper. I don't want to be a product. I want to be a person. The room seemed to hold its breath. Kelly gave a small, understanding smile. That's something everyone can relate to. The moment was raw, honest, and dangerously close to breaking the polished surface of daytime television. Jason's posture softened, the fire in his eyes giving way to a heavier weight, the toll of everything he'd been holding inside. The studio lights seemed harsher now, exposing more than just his face. He spoke quietly, voice thick with emotion. It's not just about the industry or the media. It's personal. The anxiety, the isolation, it's real. He paused, fingers tapping a restless rhythm on his knee. I'm not proud to admit this, but therapy became my lifeline. There were nights I felt I was losing myself. Kelly's expression shifted, her usual role as host dissolving into genuine concern. It takes courage to share that. Jason gave a tired nod. My kids. They deserve more than a distracted father. Guilt gnaws at me every day for the moments missed. His voice cracked slightly, and the audience shifted in their seats, sensing the vulnerability spilling beyond scripted lines. He swallowed hard and continued, the pressure to keep performing, to smile, when inside I'm struggling. It's exhausting. I want people to see the whole me, not just the mask. Kelly leaned forward, voice soft but steady. Thank you for trusting us with that. The studio felt still, caught in the fragile space between celebrity and human performance and truth. For a moment, the cameras were witnesses not to spectacle, but to genuine confession. Jason's eyes met the lens directly. Maybe if we stop hiding behind the image, we can start healing. The audience murmured in quiet agreement, attention, easing into something raw, real, and hopeful. The moment the show cut to commercial, the world outside erupted. Social media feeds flooded with clips, GIFs, and hot takes. Hashtags like Momo Meltdown and Rajesh Momoa trended within minutes, fracturing public opinion almost instantly. Some called it a meltdown, labeling him unprofessional, unpredictable, even unhinged. Others hailed his honesty, praising the courage it took to challenge the polished facade of daytime TV. Commentators debated furiously. Was this the collapse of celebrity culture, or the birth of something more authentic? News outlets ran headlines dissecting every second of the exchange. The late-night talk shows teased their own takes, eager to capitalize on the viral moment. Streaming platforms reported spikes in viewership, while podcasts dedicated entire episodes to parsing Jason's emotional testimony. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled, their phones buzzing with messages from network executives demanding damage control. Clips were hastily edited, sound bites isolated and repurposed, narratives spun to suit various agendas. The machinery of media churned relentlessly, reshaping raw truth into consumable content. Meanwhile, fan forums erupted with support. Personal stories poured in, people who saw their own struggles reflected in Jason's words, who felt a little less alone because he dared to speak so openly. Within hours, the public courtroom was convened online. Every tweet, comment, and article acting as witness testimony in the trial of Jason Momoa's public image. Back in the studio, Kelly watched the unfolding storm with a mix of awe and apprehension. What had started as a simple interview had transformed into a cultural reckoning. The stakes were clear: authenticity versus spectacle, vulnerability versus performance, truth versus consumption. And the verdict was still unwritten. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the cameras returned from commercial break. The atmosphere palpably changed. Kelly leaned forward, her voice softer, almost gentle. "Jason, I want to understand, what do you want from this moment? From all of this?" She asked, eyes searching. Jason exhaled slowly, the fire in his gaze cooling into something clearer, more resolved. "I want us to stop glossing over complexity," he said quietly. "To let real discourse in the messy, uncomfortable truths that don't fit into a 30-second clip." For the first time, a faint smile touched his lips, no longer forced, but genuine. "I want people to see that it's okay not to be okay, that vulnerability isn't weakness, but strength." Kelly nodded, moved by his words. "That's a powerful message." Jason's voice grew firmer. "If we demand authenticity, we have to be ready for discomfort, because discomfort births connection." The tension in the room shifted. What had been confrontation now felt like a fragile bridge forming between celebrity and sincerity, performer and person. The audience, sensing this change, began to relax, their applause warmer, more heartfelt. Behind the scenes, producers exchanged looks, realizing the moment had transcended typical daytime television drama. Kelly smiled softly, her tone sincere. "Thank you for being honest." Jason met her gaze, a quiet understanding passing between them. "Thank you for listening." In that suspended moment, the boundaries between media spectacle and human truth blurred, leaving only the fragile, beautiful space where real stories live. Jason stood slowly, the weight of the moment settling over him like a cloak. The studio seemed to hold its breath, the usual chatter fading into silence. His eyes scanned the room, the audience, the cameras, Kelly before he spoke, his voice steady and clear. "If we demand authenticity," he began, "we must be willing to face the discomfort it brings. Discomfort is not the enemy. It is the catalyst for connection, for understanding." His hands gestured lightly, as if emphasizing the gravity of his words. "We live in a world that prefers neat packages, quick laughs, and sound bites. But real life, it's messy, it's complicated, it's painful." He paused, the silence deepening. "The impact, if the artist doesn't stand for truth, who will? If we continue to let media dictate our stories, we lose the very essence of what makes us human." Kelly nodded, her eyes glistening. "It's a challenge to break the mold, but it's necessary." Jason's gaze softened. "This isn't about tearing down. It's about building up. About honoring the complexity of our lives and our work. About allowing space for honesty, even when it's uncomfortable." The audience erupted in applause, not the polite clapping of stage shows, but genuine, resonant, heartfelt approval. Cameras captured smiles, tears, nods of agreement. As the applause swelled, Jason offered a final thought, his voice dropping to a near whisper, but carrying across the room. In the glare of neon lights, truth found its stage. Kelly smiled warmly. "Thank you, Jason, for sharing your truth with us." The episode closed not with spectacle, but with a sense of poetic justice, authenticity reclaimed, vulnerability honored, and a call to demand more from the stories we consume. The court of public opinion had spoken, and for once, the verdict was clear. As the studio lights dimmed and the final applause faded, a quiet stillness settled over the room. But the conversation was far from over. Jason's words had ignited something deeper, on movement beyond the glare of the cameras and the curated narratives. Kelly leaned forward one last time, voice sincere and reflective. Jason, what do you hope this moment will inspire, not just in the industry, but in all of us watching? Jason met her gaze, his expression resolute yet hopeful. I want us to remember that behind every headline, every clip, every story, there are real people struggling with real pain and real hopes. If we can start to see each other that way, with compassion and honesty, maybe we can change the culture, not just of media, but of connection itself. The audience, now hushed, absorbed the weight of his call. It was a challenge, an invitation, a reckoning. Kelly smiled softly. A powerful note to end on. As the cameras slowly pulled back, the scene faded not into darkness, but into a lingering light, the kind that promises truth can find a place, even in the most unlikely arenas. Outside the studio, the digital world continued to buzz debates, support, criticism, all part of the ongoing trial. But now, a new chapter had begun. One where vulnerability was no longer a liability, but a strength. The story was far from over. It was only just unfolding. The cameras cut to a wide shot as the studio audience rose to their feet, a wave of applause, sweeping through the room like a tide breaking against the shore. This was no ordinary standing ovation. It was a collective recognition, a moment of shared understanding that transcended entertainment. Jason's shoulders relaxed for the first time in the interview. His smile was genuine, not rehearsed, as he looked around at the faces illuminated by the soft glow of the studio lights. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for being part of this." Kelly's voice rose above the applause, warm and sincere. This conversation reminds us all that behind every story is a human being, a complex, beautiful, imperfect soul. And that's something worth celebrating. As the show wrapped, behind the scenes, producers and crew exchanged glances. They knew they had witnessed something rare, a moment where vulnerability pierced the spectacle and truth held center stage. Outside, the social media storm continued to evolve. But now, alongside the critiques and memes, there were stories of hope, resilience, and the courage to be real. The final image lingered. Jason Momoa, not just a star, but a man who had dared to lose it on live television, and in doing so, had found something far more powerful. Authenticity. The credits rolled, but the conversation, much like the public's reckoning with fame, truth, and performance, was only beginning.